The following series contains graphic material and is intended for a mature audience. This podcast contains the impressions and the opinions of the hosts based on the information available to them at the time of this recording.
Dr. Crowder, do you believe that the murders of Nancy Merck and Deborah Kay were premeditated?
So I want to start out by saying that I will generate some hypotheses that make sense based on the circumstantial evidence available to me. I, of course, never did examinations of the individuals involved. I never witnessed any of the actions that we're going to talk about today, so I'm simply going to talk about my hypotheses about what might have been going on and what some of the motivations might have been, given my background, but these are not certainly proven or all truth or that sort of thing. Assuming that both are murders, they don't appear to have been premeditated. They look as if they were sudden, impulsive actions. There was no attempt, no credible attempt anyway, to cover up the evidence or try to evade responsibility. When questioned about Deborah's death, for instance, there was no denial whatsoever. It was actually remarkably nonchalant. The confession that I read was simply sort of matter of fact. The person took responsibility. This is rather unusual. It does make me wonder if there was a confidence that this gentleman knew that he might not be incarcerated very long, even if he took responsibility for the deaths.
Those are the impressions of renowned forensic psychiatrist Dr. J. Crowder.
Dr. Crowder served on the faculty of UT Southwestern for many years, and at one time was a consultant to the U.S. Secret Service.
In our last episode, we discussed Jose Fernando Bustos-Diaz's escape from prison in 2010.
In 2015, Nancy's family was finally told the truth about her death.
Also in 2015, 11 years after her murder, Nancy's sexual assault kit was sent for testing. We'll share the results.
I'm TK Masters, corporate espionage operative and former detective. I've assumed dozens of aliases while running domestic and international sting operations, cracked multi-million-dollar fraud cases, investigated corrupt attorneys, and there are some cases I still can't discuss.
I'm Dr. M, neurosurgeon, attorney, and writer. After performing surgery for many years, I retired my scalpel and went to the dark side. Now, TK and I will use our combined investigative, medical, and legal expertise to analyze the most compelling and complex crime cases.
Together, we are Sleuth
and Surgeon.
This is episode 6 of Two Horse Sleigh.
A short lesson on DNA will help us understand the results from the sexual assault kit, and this will be interesting even for those who are not science geeks.
Historically, DNA evidence has been used since the late 1980s to convict criminals and exonerate the innocent, and it's reliable when performed according to strict guidelines.
So DNA 101, and I will try and be brief. DNA contains short tandem repeats, abbreviated as STRs. These are short sequences of DNA repeated many times in a row. The number of times these sequences repeat varies from person to person.
So unrelated people are less likely to have the same number of repeated sequences, correct?
Right, and the more sequences studied, the stronger the results of the analysis.
There's another aspect of STR testing which is important as it relates to Nancy's sexual assault kit.
STRs on chromosomes which don't determine gender are called autosomal STRs. In contrast, Y STRs are on the Y chromosome, which determines male sex.
Profiles from autosomal STRs are statistically stronger than Y STRs.
That's because males in a paternal line have nearly identical Y chromosomes.
In Nancy's samples, there was a large amount of her DNA and a very dilute component of male DNA. It seems only YSTR testing could be done because of this dilution.
We talked about Jose Fernando Bustos-Diaz's DNA being entered into CODIS, the DNA database, in 2005 after he killed Deborah Kay.
CODIS accepts YSTR profiles for missing people, but not for the criminal database.
So the Waller County Sheriff's Office requested Bustos-Diaz's buccal swabs also taken in 2005.
Those swabs were used in 2015 for YSTR testing.
The DNA from Nancy's sexual assault kit was linked to Bustos-Diaz's DNA with YSTR testing.
This result was crucial, but because it was YSTR testing, a paternal relative of Bustos-Diaz could not be excluded as a source of the DNA.
Remember, Bustos-Diaz worked at the Morning View Ranch with Cardenas Gonzalez, who was rumored to be a relative of Bustos-Diaz.
And both men were at the ranch the day Nancy was murdered.
Although the YSTR testing could not exclude a paternal relative of Bustos-Diaz, the totality of the evidence supported Bustos-Diaz as Nancy Merck's killer.
It's definitely worth reviewing all the evidence.
There was an abundance of forensic evidence to prove Bustos-Diaz murdered Deborah Kay, and he confessed to killing her.
Nancy and Deborah were murdered with the same M.O.
And there's no evidence Cardenas Gonzalez ever worked for Deborah Kay.
Additionally, Harris County listed Nancy's murder as an extraneous offense.
It seems they believed Bustos-Diaz killed her. These facts and the DNA results in Nancy's case support Bustos-Diaz as her killer.
In 2015, Warren DeProm, the Waller County prosecutor, planned to file capital murder charges against Bustos-Diaz for Nancy's murder.
That was until the feds showed up and told DeProm to put a hold on it.
In Texas, the penalty for capital murder can be death.
Mexico has an extradition treaty with the U.S. Mexico could refuse to extradite Bustos-Diaz because he might be punished by death.
So DeProm waited about 2 years.
Then the feds told DeProm they had a hot source on Bustos-Diaz, that he was living in Mexico and working for a cartel. So there was hope that Bustos-Diaz would be arrested.
But that didn't happen. Years went by, and Bustos-Diaz was not apprehended.
TK, when you started looking into this case, you met with a Texas Ranger, and he asked you to stand down.
Right. In November 2017, I met with the ranger overseeing Nancy's case. And yes, I was asked to stand down because I was told the rangers were in the process of extraditing Bustos-Diaz from Mexico.
Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Crowder had some thoughts on the possibility of Bustos-Diaz working for the cartel.
One would think that the structure of this kind of organization, which would be something like a substitute family, would impose a degree of discipline on him that he wouldn't have necessarily had before. But an organization gives you meaning, more prosperity, and acceptance, as well as the praise of other members of the gang. These are mostly the things that sustain us in other occupations. Unfortunately, this is illegal, but the needs for recognition by one's colleagues, the needs for basic human necessities to be taken care of, and the sense of belonging, those will still be there. And even though this is a twisted and dystopian culture that he would be integrated into, it would still give him some direction and purpose that I think might otherwise have been lacking.
Whether or not Bustos-Diaz had joined a gang, he remained at large and was not charged with Nancy's murder.
Her family waited for development, but there was no communication from the Waller County Sheriff's Office.
Instead, there was silence again for years.
Then, in November 2020, Troy Guidry was elected Waller County Sheriff, the first new sheriff since 2008.
Sheriff Guidry began his law enforcement career in 1992 with the Harris County Sheriff's Office, one of the largest in the country.
As sheriff of Waller County, Guidry's goal was to improve law enforcement services by bringing in experienced investigators.
In 2021, Sheriff Guidry hired Chuck Leitner to review Nancy Merck's case. Leitner previously worked for more than 20 years as a detective in Harris County's Homicide Division.
He concluded his investigation into Nancy's death in June 2023 and handed his findings off to the Waller County District Attorney's Office.
What would they do with Nancy's case?
Well, we found out on September 5th, 2023, when we met with Mia Magnus, who at the time was the acting Waller County District Attorney.
She did not see eye to eye with Warren DeProm regarding the prosecution of Bustos-Diaz for Nancy's murder.
And she cited two reasons.
First, based on the DNA results, a paternal relative of Bustos-Diaz could not be excluded as the killer.
Detective Leitner attempted but could not locate Jose Luis Cardenas Gonzalez, who was working with Bustos-Diaz on the Morning View Ranch the day Nancy was murdered.
The Waller County District Attorney's second concern was a procedural issue.
For this, we need to dig into the law a bit.
Right. In Texas, a juvenile is less than 17 years old, and there are rules for prosecution to ensure that there is resolution in the juvenile system.
Based on the birth certificate Bustos-Diaz provided in 2005, he was a juvenile when he murdered both Nancy and Deborah, and he was certified as a juvenile in Harris County for Deborah's murder.
To prosecute Bustos-Diaz for Nancy's murder, the Waller County DA's office should have filed a petition in Waller County before he turned 18, but they did not.
Which is problematic because Bustos-Diaz is now an adult.
This requires a different legal process, often called a post-18 certification process.
Several factors must be met to justify the delay by the state.
One is, after due diligence, it was not practicable for the state to proceed in juvenile court before the person's 18th birthday for lack of probable cause, and new evidence has been found since the person's 18th birthday, or the person couldn't be found.
Let's break this down, Dr. M. First, due diligence by the state is required.
In Nancy's case, we've discussed what we believe to be the many instances of lack of due diligence. As to the whereabouts of Bustos-Diaz after Nancy's murder, he could have been found.
Likely, he was in Waller for at least 6 weeks after Nancy's murder.
He did file that assault claim in Waller in July 2004.
Waller County knew about Bustos-Diaz's arrest for Deborah Kay's murder on January 31st, 2005, and should have known about his incarceration through 2010.
That leaves the state to argue that they didn't have probable cause and new evidence has been found since Bustos-Diaz's 18th birthday.
Which brings us to the boots found on the stall floor. Nancy likely had been wearing them when she was attacked.
The day after she was killed, those boots were given to Nancy's husband, Wayne. He recalled putting them in his attic.
Law enforcement never asked Wayne to return the boots. If recovered, there'd be chain of custody concerns, but we thought it was worth trying to find them.
On February 23, 2024, we informed Lieutenant Garner with the Waller County Sheriff's Office the boots Nancy was wearing when she was killed may be in Wayne's attic.
Now, his response was Waller County had enough evidence and the case had been given to the district attorney's office.
Having enough evidence, that's not consistent with what we were told by the Waller County District Attorney's Office.
We discussed their concerns with YSTR results.
So this situation with the boots, TK, we knew it was a long shot.
Absolutely. First, you have to find them. Then hope they'll yield DNA or fingerprint evidence.
And if DNA was present, it would likely degrade over 20 years in an attic. Texas summers can be blistering.
On March 6, 2024, we searched Wayne Wilner's attic.
Unfortunately, we did not find the boots. The family had donated some of Nancy's riding gear, and the boots may well have been included.
We continued to brainstorm the requirement for new evidence found after Bustos-Diaz's 18th birthday.
Another improbable long shot came to mind.
When Deborah Kay was murdered, the Harris County Sheriff's Office collected clothing from Bustos-Diaz, including pants, socks, a t-shirt, a jacket, and sandals.
Multiple knives were also collected from Deborah's home and Bustos-Diaz's trailer.
Bustos-Diaz's bloody black and red jogging pants had a mixture of DNA. The major contributor was Deborah Kay.
Interestingly, Bustos-Diaz was excluded as a contributor to the DNA on those jogging pants. So whose DNA was on those pants?
We did say this was a long shot, but what if it belonged to Nancy Merck? Could Bustos-Diaz have worn the same clothing or shoes while committing both murders?
Back in our first episode, we discussed conflicting reports. Was Nancy's blood on whiskey?
It's important because if Bustos-Diaz was the ranch hand who helped remove whiskey from the stall, any blood on whiskey could have been transferred to Bustos-Diaz's clothing.
That leaves the knives. Both women were killed with a knife with smooth edges.
DNA testing was also performed on these items in August 2005. There was a mixture of DNA on one of the knives.
Most of the DNA was Deborah's, but no conclusion was made regarding the minor DNA contributor.
Did Bustos-Diaz use the same knife to murder Nancy and Deborah?
Or possibly he just kept the knife he used to kill Nancy Merck.
If Nancy's blood was on one of those knives, it might be considered new evidence.
DNA testing has improved considerably over the past 15 years.
And fortunately, we determined the Harris County Sheriff's Office still had the evidence from Deborah's case.
In June 2024, we talked to the Waller County detective on Nancy's case about obtaining the evidence from Harris County Sheriff's Office for testing.
The Texas Rangers have funds for that purpose, and Nancy Merck has a Texas Ranger case number.
There's another way the requirement for new evidence might be satisfied. In September 2023, the Waller County DA's office arranged for DPS to retest evidence from Nancy's case.
We were not given specifics, but likely this involves a sexual assault kit and utilizing a technique which was previously unavailable.
To sum things up, there are prospects for strengthening the DNA evidence in Nancy's case.
But what is paramount is apprehending Bustos-Diaz.
Dr. Crowder noted this could be challenging if Bustos-Diaz was in a gang.
Being able to apprehend him, it's going to be very difficult. And these are such closed societies and strictly enforced silence about who is part of the group, what their activities are, that sort of thing. You would think some kind of infiltration into one of the groups might be almost the only way you could do it.
An arrest warrant was issued for Bustos-Diaz on April 6, 2010, the day he escaped from the Briscoe unit. More than 15 years have passed, and he has not been apprehended.
He still has 30 years to serve for murdering Deborah Kay.
If caught, he'd face charges for the prison escape and likely be sentenced to additional time.
According to the Texas Department of Public Safety 10 Most Wanted Fugitive list, Bustos-Diaz is considered armed and dangerous.
He's also on the U.S. Marshal's 15 Most Wanted Fugitives list. The Marshals state it is believed he is being assisted by friends and family in the United States.
The Marshals also state on their website, Bustos-Diaz is the prime suspect in a second murder.
Waller County law enforcement seems to have finally accepted Jose Fernando Bustos-Diaz and not a horse killed Nancy Merck.
We'll close with comments from forensic psychiatrist Dr. Jay Crowder, who provided keen insights throughout this episode.
Reviewing these records gave me a deep sense of sadness for the loss of life and the pain and the suffering that would have been left in the wake of these lady's deaths. So I just wanted to say that I think we all need to consider the sadness that must have attended their families in the aftermath of their deaths.
In the epilogue, we'll reveal the latest developments.
As in all criminal matters, persons are considered innocent unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. You should not approach or make contact in any way with any suspect or wanted fugitive named in the content of this program or any related social media site, as they may be dangerous. For more information and photos related to this case, visit our YouTube channel @sleuth&surgeon.